Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, panelists, for being here. My name is Angela Ferrante, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer at a company called Spark Fund. We'll get into bios in a minute, but we are here at NYU today with a set of distinguished speakers to talk about energy startups and women in leadership. So I will introduce our panelists and elaborate on that in a minute. A quick note to start is that the event is being webcast live, and both the full video and podcast recording will be available on the website and iTunes in the coming days. For those in the audience and also watching online, you can ask a question for the panelists anytime using the hashtag CGEP events and the Twitter handle ColumbiaUEnergy. So to kick us off, I'd like for each of the panelists to introduce themselves. I think they can do so more eloquently than I can. We'll get into a little bit about their subjective experiences from there, and then round out some thoughts about women in leadership. So Ali, do you want to kick us off and we can go down the line?
Sure. Hey, everyone. How you doing?
Oh, one more thing. So if you can talk a little bit about your experience to date, and then share kind of what challenge you are working on solving in your current role.
The meta challenge or like the personal challenge?
Your choice. Both.
Okay. Hey, everyone. I didn't really hear you before. How are you? All right. I'm Ali Adler. I'm the Director of Partnerships at Sealed. We make making home energy upgrades affordable and accountable for homeowners by letting them pay for these improvements directly with the energy savings that the improvements achieve for them. So it's an innovative financing product for home improvements. And how I got into this role, I've had a number of different positions over the course of my career. I started off working in campus sustainability for a nonprofit organization that evaluated institutions of higher education and their sustainability programs called the Sustainable Endowments Institute. And I went on from there to work for the state of Massachusetts and their clean energy agency. Did that for a while. I ended up getting really interested in startups from that experience because I got to work with a lot of different private businesses from my role in government, actually. I got sort of a bird's eye view of the industry and the exciting companies, and I ended up getting recruited to run a startup accelerator program called Clean Tech Open. And I did that for between that and then a subsequent program I ran in conjunction with it for 4 years, working with a variety of different startup companies across the region, clean tech startup companies. One of the companies I worked with during that time was Sealed. And so I ended up joining them. And the challenge we're working on at Sealed is that making home energy efficiency improvements, specifically things that aren't super sexy or exciting, like air sealing and insulation, new boilers and HVAC systems, can be really expensive without significant incentives or subsidies from government programs. And a lot of people, even though they are uncomfortable in their homes, significantly uncomfortable in their homes because of drafts and cold floors and other issues that are symptoms of these poor insulation and these problems, they don't do it because of the upfront cost or because they don't want to take out a loan to do this kind of work in their house. So at a meta level, we're trying to make it easier and a better experience for people to do these upgrades because we're taking on the risk that those savings will actually materialize for them. I personally, the challenge I'm working on right now for the company, this is it's a really cool idea and customers really love it, but it's a really hard product to actually execute and a really hard product to package in a way that's easily understandable to the average consumer. So I spend a lot of my time both working on our product and our product marketing materials and our sales pitch with our sales team to make that communication simpler and easier to understand for customers. And I also spend a lot of time figuring out how we can train contractors in the field to sell this product with us and on our behalf. So that's probably the biggest challenge that I'm working on right now, is making this something not only we can sell, but that our partners can and want to sell more than any other financial option for their customers.
All right, tough to follow. Hello, everybody. I am Mouchka. I have a probably slightly different background than most of you because my background is qualitative. I studied political science in undergrad, and then I went to Georgetown School of Foreign Service to study international relations and multilateral negotiations. And after that, I joined a corporate strategy team at The Economist, where I helped build the first data division of a company. So how I ended up in clean tech is that as I started getting a little bit more comfortable in my role at The Economist, I started looking for more challenges, for the opportunity to step outside of my comfort zone. And at the same time, Justin Trudeau was elected, the Prime Minister of Canada, and a lot of very exciting things started happening in infrastructure and in clean technology, the environment and energy from Canada in the US. So I thought, how cool would it be to join that? So I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to do just that, and so I became the Trade Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy, based in New York. And so what I do is that I help Canadian companies in infrastructure and in energy that are early stage, small or medium sized, to actually not just enter this market here in New York and in the US, but also to grow significantly in this market. So as a result, there are a few challenges that I work on that actually touch on what you talked about, Ali, which is, first of all, understanding the broad ecosystem of energy and sustainability, energy efficiency, etc., where there are so many dots that need to be connected beyond the policies, beyond the long-term energy savings that both residential and commercial projects can benefit from. You need to often connect people to financial solutions. You need to often connect people to regulators. You need to connect people to actual projects and decision makers of all kinds and sorts. So I work on that. I will connect dots all day long. I'm a sort of modern matchmaker, if you will, in a very polyamorous relationship. And then on a more personal level, I work with a lot of young leaders, and so my challenge is to help people adapt to the U.S. market and to the New York market, help them present what they do, help them communicate what they do, and then adapt their strategies from one country to the next. So that's always interesting and fun.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Nice to see you all here. My name is Claire Borredo Johnson. I currently have a company called CBJ Energy. We originate and finance property assessed clean energy deals, which is a financing structure that enables commercial retrofits to occur. I'm also doing some consulting to a company in California named Katerra, Katerra, which is changing the way that multifamily housing is built. And I am sort of their little energy czar, trying to figure out how to incorporate solar and storage in what they build. So the question of why did I get in, or how did I get into this field? I've wanted to do it since I was a little kid. I did my science fair projects in 3rd grade and 7th grade and 8th grade on acid rain and its effects on a water environment. I grew up outside of Chicago in the cornfields, and acid rain was a big deal back then. And I created the environmental science undergrad major at Harvard when I was there. I worked for several years here in New York, then in Enron for a couple years, helping to finance the first wind turbines at Enron. Then I went back to business school at Harvard Business School, and there was no Enron to go back to. So I wound up at Constellation in Baltimore City, which is where I currently live. Constellation was an interesting place. I was an originator on the trading floor. Realized that they weren't that interested in renewables, so started SunEdison with my business partner, Jigar Shah, in 2003. We grew the company from a 2-person company. At one point, SunEdison had 7,200 employees and $10 billion of revenue. But both Jigar and I had left in 2008, 2009. I spent a couple years at the Department of Energy, where I was Secretary Chu's Energy Efficiency Advisor, and I was also responsible for deploying $11 billion of the stimulus package, which was very interesting to work for the federal government. I am not particularly patient, though, and entrepreneurship fits me much better. So I've worked for a number of energy startups since, including Sirius Energy, and Next Step Living, which was based in Boston, where I was responsible for opening their offices in Connecticut and New York, and for launching a community solar product. In terms of what I find challenging right now, I have a 2.5-year-old and a 6.5-year-old, and I'm finding it challenging to stay super committed and involved in my career and staying at the top of my game and actually spending time with my children. And there is no way to win that. And this is kind of the first time in my life where I'm realizing that there are literally only 24 hours in a day. And when you're with your children, you're by default not with doing work, and vice versa. So it's the continual challenge. It's impossible to have it all. And trying to be very present where you are and not feeling guilty is an important thing I strive to do every day.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really excited to dive into some of the topics we have on tap, given all of your backgrounds. I think we have a little bit of a bias towards current work in the energy efficiency space, but at the same time, the panelists bring collective experience in renewables and in other corners of the energy sector that I think will be really well-rounded. So quick bio on my end. Again, Angela Ferrante. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Spark Fund. Spark Fund is a DC-based company. We're a financial technology company really focused on radically simplifying how businesses access energy-efficient technologies. So we're removing the upfront cost barrier, but we're doing more than that. It's not just a financing mechanism, but instead a new model for accessing new, better equipment in buildings, so in commercial spaces. And in some ways, there are, I think, a lot of parallels to what Ali and Sealed is doing on the residential side for us in the commercial world. Prior to my time at Spark Fund, I spent about 6 years at a company based in Boston, an insurance company in the energy sector. And I was the founding team member on the Alternative Energy Group, where we were developing solutions to de-risk alternative energy as well as energy efficiency projects. So guaranteeing energy savings, also guaranteeing production on the renewable side. Great. Okay. So again, for those watching online and listening to the podcast, I'm here with Ali Adler, Director of Partnerships at Sealed, with Claire Broido-Johnson, President at CBJ Energy and founder, and Mouchka Heller, Trade Commissioner in the Infrastructure and Energy Group at Government of Canada. Correct? Great. So we're going to have a conversation with the panelists and open it up to questions from the audience in a little bit. For those here in person, there is a microphone right behind you that you can step up to at the appropriate time to ask questions. And then for those watching online, you can use, again, the hashtag CGEP events and the Twitter handle Columbia U University to ask a question. Fantastic. Okay. So we are discussing energy startups. I think, as you have heard, all of us come to the stage today with a little bit of experience or a lot of experience at startups and working with startups. So we're going to talk a bit about that. To state the obvious, these are women who are in positions of influence and leadership roles, and they have taken on immense responsibility in their careers. So I want to dive into a bit about how they've done that. How have they established themselves in careers, what their experiences have been like as individuals and as women. So we'll talk a little bit from there about being a leader as a female, whether they do or do not identify with that. Again, we'll get into that in a little bit. And then to close, I think, talk a little bit about how we get to a world where we have equal representation by women in the boardroom. I think it's really important to set the premise now. We all agree that we need more women in leadership roles. Diversity of all types makes for better decisions, better outcomes, better organizations. I hope that is undisputed at this point. Gender diversity is what we will be focusing on today. So instead of letting this be sort of a chorus for conviction around the fact that that's a problem, I'd really like us to focus on how we get there, how we overcome that challenge, and diving into our individual experiences about what's been hard, what's been challenging, what has given us opportunities that we think are unique and feel grateful for. And then closing on what we can do, what are actionable steps to overcome. So with that, let's dive in. I think, independent of gender, right? What made you choose to get into, broadly speaking, clean tech? You want to start on that end, maybe, Claire?
Sure. I've always been interested in clean tech since I was a little kid. Clean tech is particularly interesting. I mean, I started in the clean tech space in late 90s, which is kind of early, maybe a little too early to get. We haven't gotten the level of sort of growth, exponential growth. But I think clean tech's a really exciting industry. You all obviously agree, otherwise you wouldn't be here. It's growing quickly. Our infrastructure is not really ready to, our electrical grid in the United States. I'm going to talk mostly about the United States because that's where my background lies. Our grid is not ready for the changes that we're seeing in the storage and the solar and sort of virtual energy uses, the Internet of Things, et cetera, et cetera. And I just find it's a fascinating field with a lot of growth potential in an industry that really is a very old fuddy-duddy space. So, I mean, when I went to Enron in the late 90s, I was the token female and the token Democrat on the trading floor. And that's really where we came from. And I know there's folks in the audience that dealt with that same sort of thing. It was, cowboys who had their big boots on and were chewing tobacco. And that was really, that was 15, 20 years ago. It's really not that much, it's not that long in the grand scheme of things. So I think it's important to sort of stop and remember where we're coming from. This is an old-fashioned oil and gas, some nuclear industry where you've got one power plant and a lot of people that are served by that power plant. And we're seeing things that are completely different today. That's a function both of subsidies, people have been subsidizing renewable energy and energy efficiency, but also because of economics, right? So, I mean, when, my territory, my home is in Baltimore Gas and Electric territory, and they have a program called Peak Rewards. Most utilities have something like this, but my house gets paid for turning off its air conditioning from 1 to 5 p.m. during the summer. And that is so much cheaper than having Baltimore Gas and Electric or Constellation build a new peaker power plant. And so it's sort of turning the infrastructure that the electrical grid has on its head. And that's happened really in the last 20 years. And so I find it a fascinating field. And it's also a field that's very interdisciplinary, right? It requires social understandings, economics, infrastructure, entrepreneurship, all sorts of different types of business, accounting, engineering. And that's what's appealing to me personally, is I have to use all of those skill sets every day. I'm a scientist by background. I took atmospheric chemistry all through college, but I actually use that and in my business. And I really like applying science to entrepreneurship today.
Everything she said. No, but seriously, as I said, I come from a non, all exhaustive clean tech background. My professional experience before this was in data and data strategy. There, like in clean tech, there was a sort of revolution that was happening, where you have a concept that has existed for a very long time. You have an infrastructure that has existed for a very long time, but you have suddenly a slew of innovation that is making us think differently about that concept and about that infrastructure and about what we can do with it. And I looked for the same things in clean tech and in energy when I came on board that new industry. So for me, it was about the challenge of it. It was about the excitement of the revolution, that is implied within that. There is something very formative, I would say, about being part of concrete change. It's great to be able to talk about, these overall movements in an industry and in the world. It's something else to see day to day what it actually takes, hour to hour, what the boring days look like, what the good days look like, what the paperwork looks like. You really do get a very different understanding of how you create change, how you foster it, and how you make it happen. So to me, that was the most interesting thing about it. Working for the government of Canada in the US also had an appeal of its own because, well, it can be a little bit difficult to sell foreign goods, services, and innovation in the US, but B, because of the vision, that is currently happening in Canada. And so for me, as a strategic planner, as a corporate strategist, I'm really fascinated by how do you actually make this vision into a product, into a service, into something that actually gets used and actually slowly but surely builds incremental change. So that's what I wanted to get involved with, and that's why I joined Clean Tech.
A lot of similar reasons. I got really passionate about solutions to climate change when I was a senior in high school when An Inconvenient Truth was released. And I basically decided when I saw that documentary that I was going to make solving this problem the mission of my life. And when I was a student, did a lot of lobbying and activism and organizing, things like lying out in front of Bank of America and waiting to get arrested, protesting mountaintop removal. And, I got really burned out really quickly from that because at the time, it was the 2007 energy bill, didn't make it. And there's like a lot of legislation happening both on the state and national level that there was a lot of hope at the time that we were going to see a national carbon limitation legislation, and it never happened. I got really burned out trying to work for government solutions, and that's when I really turned towards institutional and business-driven solutions because, like my collaborator was saying, it's really meaningful to see tangible change on an active, based on a day-to-day basis. And for me, I really needed to be able to feel like I was a part of active change that wasn't necessarily moving so slowly in order to sustain myself. That's why I turned to the business side of clean tech. And something Claire said I think is really interesting is I don't actually have a science background. I think that's one of the things that holds women back from being leaders in this field is that there are less women with science backgrounds because a lot of women need engineering backgrounds in this field. But the thing that I think is really exciting now about this field is, and one of the things that drew me to solving this problem is it is a social and behavioral challenge as much as it is a scientific challenge. And so the thing that keeps me excited about it is there's all these opportunities to drive individual change by commercializing technology in a meaningful way for consumers. So that's what's kept me in the field is that I was a sociology major, I can apply my knowledge of the social and behavioral sciences, my interest in consumer psychology and design to a field that has a tangible global impact.
Great. So it sounds like common threads. We've got the interdisciplinary nature of things is certainly one. For many of you, you talked about the connection to a deeper social and just massive humanity challenge, right? And feeling conviction for that. And then there also sounds like a thread of impatience running through all of us, right? That the desire to do something quicker than you can wait for a whole lot of people to do it. And I can relate to that, certainly. So I think along those lines, have you found in the startup space, either working in a startup or with a startup, that is meaningfully different? And has that sort of fulfilled that need to be connected to the thread of change that you're wanting to see?
I can start. So we work with a lot of startups and a lot of smaller businesses. So I've had the chance to witness quite a few of them working in this sector. I think that on one hand, a startup or smaller business is more agile than a bigger corporation or a governmental entity, and many of them are very much able to leverage that into results. I mean, after all, if you guys are following what's hot in business today, it is to become agile, to become elastic, to work faster, to become more flexible, et cetera, et cetera. So startups naturally, organically build this kind of environment, and in that sense, they have a tremendous advantage in the market. I would say, to play devil's advocate a little bit, that on the other hand, startups do tend to have a more focused expertise, and sometimes it's around one specific product or one specific service, and that can do them a disservice when they try to engage in broader conversations or when they try to reach decision makers that are not yet quite where they are with their specific product and service. And it can also be difficult when actually you tend to have founders and founding teams that are more on the scientific and engineering spectrum, and they believe in their products and in their services so much, and they really truly do have something great. They don't know how to sell it, they don't know how to market it, and they don't know how to translate it. And so that kind of takes us back to that interdisciplinary concept, which I think is so important.
I think to build on that, yes, and the challenge of being a startup in the energy space is, like Claire was saying, this is a very entrenched industry and it's not naturally prone to innovation. So we do a lot of work with utilities, for example, and utility partnerships. We've been lucky that our startup is coming of age in New York during New York Revs, so there's more openness to innovation. Frankly, I don't think we would have been able to have the kinds of relationships that we have with utilities if it wasn't for Rev and the fact that the regulators were effectively forcing them to pay attention to companies like ours. And so, it's really hard if you're a startup and you're trying to get noticed and get traction in an industry that is mostly players who have no incentive to do anything differently from the way they've done it for over 100 years in the past. And so while startups can have really unique and innovative ways of approaching things in this industry, actually achieving commercialization is, I think, harder in this industry than almost any other industry because of that entrenched nature of the industry.
And back to sort of the starting up entrepreneurial venture, I think I have started a number of companies and I have mentored dozens and dozens of people who have started companies, and I've invested in lots of companies. And I think the overarching theme in the clean tech entrepreneurial space, and I would imagine in most startups, is that ego often gets in the way. Somebody has a great idea. If they can't execute themselves out of a paper bag, it's not going anywhere, right? So you need somebody who is excellent at operating and executing, and I think that goes to the ego point. So I am self-aware enough to know that I'm not a particularly good visionary, but I can execute anything, and I'm excellent at operations and business development, but I'm terrible at marketing. And I can list a long list of things that I'm terrible at, but I think it's having a lot of self-understanding and self-awareness, both of yourself and being able to read the other people that you are working with and how they think. That is what ruins or keeps companies together. And it seems simplistic, but it's really not, because usually the person who has the vision has the ego and might have an excellent idea, but needs to be self-aware enough to understand what he or she needs that he or she does not have. And that's whether you are designing a new widget or creating a financing structure or any myriad of things. The startups that I've worked for, the people who have the most humility are the ones that do the best. I think it's important to have a healthy ego, but it's also really important to understand what you're good at and what you're not good at. And I think that's where most of the companies that I have seen in my little universe have failed, is when they don't do that well.
And also what resources you have. We deal with all those challenges, and we were dealing with this. We had our management team this morning. We basically had a 30-minute, after our normal meeting, a 30-minute vent session about basically that we have too many opportunities right now, and we don't have the resources. We're an 9-person team. We just hired someone. We're a 9-person team, about to be 10 people, but we get inbound inquiries all the time, people wanting to work with us because we have this cool idea and no one else has that right now. But we're not a large company with a lot of resources. We can't take every opportunity. Whereas, if we were to be acquired by some big retail energy company, that we'd be able to do a lot more things with our core product. It's just.
And what do you really want to be bought by?
But then
right?
We might not be what we are. So there's this constant. It's like an identity struggle, especially in this industry.
And I think the resource constrained environment is actually a great breeding ground for a lot of really solid things, right? Mm-hmm. When you have to make tough choices, you end up focusing on, hopefully, the things that will be most impactful.
Right.
So that, to me, is one of the things about startup culture that pushes you to be impactful and effective.
Right. Very true.
So I want to talk a little bit about this idea that most of you mentioned of being challenged. It clearly is something that is motivating and from a career perspective and organizational perspective, and just tying to the bigger idea of what are we all solving for, in this clean tech space. There's clearly a bigger challenge there. On an individual level, I think each of you challenge in your career is clearly important. right, and something that keeps you happy. But have you taken on in the past responsibilities that were particularly challenging or that you possibly weren't or didn't feel qualified for? And how did that pan out? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes. I think that it's or modus operandi. I'm going to go ahead and talk for both of you because it seems very clear. For me, I have so many stories of being in places where I was not supposed to be, and being asked questions that I did not know how to answer. So my favorite is actually when I started my job in data, day one. My boss called me and said, well, we have way too many cookies on the site. You need to get rid of them. And I said, cookies? That sounds delicious. But I just said, we'll take care of it. Absolutely, no cookies. And I was Googling it as I was talking to him, and as he was telling me how important it was that they all disappear in the next hour. And then I had a lot of similar stories when I joined infrastructure and energy, again with very little knowledge of the actual industry. But I'm very lucky that I read very fast. And so I just went through every single strategic paper that the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Canada had ever published on the topic. And within a week, I had read way too many things. And then I calmed down a little bit. I think that you learn that knowledge is secondary to skills. That was my big takeaway, from these things. And it's okay to say that you don't know. It's okay to say that you need to catch up on something. It's okay to see that you need to brush up on something and to polish your knowledge of something. But the skill of actually knowing how to learn, how to research, and the self-awareness of knowing when you don't know, I think all of those, that's what's really invaluable. So that's how I calm myself down when I stress out too much.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I also spend a lot of time mentoring people in the industry. I had some wonderful mentors growing up, and I like it, and I help people find jobs because I'm relatively well connected in the industry. And what I always suggest to people is just keep gathering tools in your toolbox, right? Because you never know when you're going to need them. Whether it's financial analysis and being able to run a spreadsheet better than anybody else, or knowing who to call when you need to design a website because you're terrible at it yourself. Whatever it is, it's a variety of tools, and you keep having to gather them and having the intellectual curiosity to be able to do that. But of course, all of us everywhere in our lives, unless we're doing something very risk averse, are going to have to deal with something that we don't know about, right? And do you rise to the challenge and take it, or do you say, oh, I'm not capable of doing that, I don't know what to do? And that sort of gets a little bit to the female-male thing, and it's incredibly hard to make broad brushes of what's going on, but there have been plenty of studies that show that as a general rule, caveat, that women will often say, oh, I'm not really sure I can do that, but I'll try. Whereas men will always say, absolutely, I'll take care of this by yesterday, and that gets, and I've seen that with my male colleagues time and time again in every space I've lived, worked in. I've worked at Deloitte and Touche doing risk management consulting for utilities. And, as a quick aside, this was the late 90s, but I was doing risk management consulting to a utility in the Midwest, and I was there with my partner at the time, and I remember him saying, I'm not going to let a blonde-haired, blue-eyed little girl tell me how to run my business. And that was happened all the time, and he didn't think that was rude or obnoxious at all. That's not that long ago. That was 20 years ago, right? So the women who are rising in this space today, hopefully, God forbid, that's not going to happen to any of you, right? But it happened all the time. He didn't find that rude or insulting at all. That was just what people did. And certainly generations behind me had to deal with much worse, right? So it just is what it is. But I think as a female, you have to be twice as good and maybe not twice as aggressive, but you have to stick up for yourself more than you would have to if you were male. And I have dozens of stories like that. We could go for a long time. But it's just the fact of the matter is you have to stick up for yourself. You have to say, you know what, I don't know this, and I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to get it to you by yesterday, right? So I think it's willing to take the risk, and if you're not willing to take the risk, then go work for a Fortune 500, sitting in a back office, right?
Thanks for validation.
Yeah, very important. I think whether you're kind of reading it in scholarly texts or experiencing it firsthand by digging into a new challenge or listening to it in a soul cycle class, whatever it is, I think the idea of getting out of your comfort zone as a way to grow and expand and get better at something is really important and something that you all clearly have done. So take a second on that note. Claire, you've talked a little bit about some of the things that you're good at versus some of the things you're not good at. I'd love to hear what things do each of you possess skills or just things that you're particularly good at that have helped you get to where you are today? Sure, yeah.
So I'm very good at operations. If somebody gives me a problem I have to solve, I will figure out how to solve it. I am very impatient and I'm aggressive by nature. My father was a general surgeon, so that's kind of how I was brought up. And my mom was a nurse, and that's just who I am. And it's actually served me very well, but it's also been a big disservice. So, I can get stuff done quickly, effectively. I am not the person that's very good at sitting back, cogitating over things for a while and letting things settle and then making a decision. My husband can do that for me. But it's being aware of that. And then also, again, like the self-awareness, like I really suck at marketing and I really should not spend any time on it. I should hire somebody to do something for me. Because it's better use of my time and better use of their time. And I think it's also like, as you think through what you're good at and what you're not good at, you also have to think of sort of the time value money. Like it's going to take me 40 hours to do X, Y, Z versus I can hire my friend who's a government affairs person and it'll take him 4 hours to do it. And makes way more sense for him and for me to take care of that. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of what I'm thinking.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I'm a lot like Claire personality-wise, so similar skill set around getting things done, executing. I tend to be the person in all of the groups I work in who's actually like the tasker. I'm making sure that everyone knows what their responsibilities were coming out of the meeting and actually making sure they actually did them, which doesn't sound that special, but I realized over the course of my various jobs it's unusual. I'm a master networker and a really good salesperson, especially in an enterprise context. What I've learned, though, actually, even though I'm fascinated by consumer behavior and consumer psychology, I'm actually not as good at consumer sales because I'm too lofty in the way I talk, and I talk too much like a college-educated academic person. And doesn't come across as real. So I've had to, and I also get really focused on my goal and sometimes forget to just take a step back and observe what's going on around me, which is really important in consumer sales. So I've been learning a lot about building up my soft skills on that front of actually observation, active listening. I'm also terrible with numbers, like really, really bad. And I've had to learn a lot about financials and spreadsheets, and it's definitely in the business context, my biggest weakness.
I would say that personality-wise, I think that we share some important traits. I would also identify as an alpha female, if that makes sense. Where I came from, that was not necessarily the most common thing, but I learned to be okay with it and to leverage it. But I would say that one of the ways that I identify is as a qualitative person, a proud qualitative person. Nowadays, that's not necessarily a compliment when someone tells you you're qualitative because we prioritize science and quant so much. And to be qualitative does not mean that I can't do math, I can't do finance, and I do it very well. It's that the way that I think is qualitative, it's nuanced. I like to observe people, I like to observe mechanisms, to observe the way that a group thinks, and I like to react off of that and respond to that specifically. So for me, all the soft skills are very important, and that's something that applies to men and to women. But to know how to write, to know how to speak, to know how to engage, and to know how to adapt the way that you do all of that to different people and to different situations, to me that's really a priority. And I think that that's something that a lot of people who come from different cultures or different countries have experienced. So I'm personally from France. I was born and raised in Paris. Came to the US when I was 17 for college. And the cultural clashes were many, which you wouldn't necessarily think. You know, someone who comes from a Western country going to a Western country, but I really can't even tell you. So it really teaches you that the way that you think and the way that you speak is not necessarily the way that people hear what you've said. And so that's why becoming qualitative was important to me. So when it comes to analysis, when it comes to looking at a problem, I take from my quant toolbox, and that's where I learned to be rigorous, and that's where I learned to be disciplined. But then when it comes to actually making a decision, I will always add some qualitative insights. And it helps because I'm a very quick judger, decision maker, for those of you who are into the Myers-Briggs types.
I was just about to say, it sounds like we're getting into some Myers-Briggs categories.
Essentially. And so it can be a weakness when you're like that, when you're someone who makes decisions really quickly. And so I had to learn to take a step back, you know, and then add those qualitative insights. And that kind of brings me to the last thing, which is that I get scared a lot, but I love being scared. To me, it's the best sign that I'm doing something right and that I'm on my path to something good. So anytime that I'm wondering what should I do next, I'm like, what do I fear the most? What scares me the most right now? Okay, that's what we are going for.
Again, getting out of your comfort zone is the best way to sort of expand your horizons and your own experiences and fulfillment. And also, you know, I've worked with Ali and Claire in the past, so I can speak to this firsthand. But I know having that sort of relentless bias towards action is huge as far as making progress, particularly when you're with a small team, right? It sort of speaks to the power of compounding, whether it's compounding interest or compounding small actions. In these cases, having a really incredible impact.
I would add, though, to something Claire said earlier about getting outside your comfort zone. For me, and it sounds like this has been what it's like for you, Claire, the biggest part of getting outside of my comfort zone is knowing when to not work so hard. I have really struggled to find balance, even early on in my career. I can't even imagine what it's like once you have children, not working hard. Sometimes I've had my best ideas and my best breakthroughs work-wise when I didn't work. But my tendency is just, when in doubt, work harder, work longer, right, work faster, instead of taking a step back and actually taking care of myself, which I do think is also maybe a more classic female problem of focusing on what's best for everyone else and not what's best for yourself, when in reality, doing what's best for yourself might actually be what's best for everyone.
Yeah, that's such an important point. Yeah. I completely agree. And I think that that's, again, something for men and women that is so important, is to know your own limits and to know when to say stop. Mm-hmm. And that's really hard to learn.
You maybe get sort of wound up in this very addictive cycle of making progress and focusing on a particular challenge. There's a really great book by, I'm going to probably butcher her name, I think it's Barbara Oakley is maybe the last name, A Mind for Numbers, and it talks a lot about, I see someone who has read it and likes it, a lot about kind of the focused concentration, but also diffuse mode, and how maybe it's not only best for you as a human and an individual to take a break and step back, but in reality, when it comes to solving whatever challenge you were so obsessively focused on, is probably a better way to reach a conclusion or reach a solution to that, was to step back and let your brain kind of go into this diffuse mode.
Yeah. I think some of the institutions we've probably been associated with often do us a disservice, because if you're not achieving and you're not producing, you're a loser, right? And that's how I was brought up, and there are probably lots of people who are brought up that way. And sometimes entrepreneurship doesn't work that way, right? You have some really, really good highs, and then you're literally washing bottles, right? Or like filling out stupid paperwork because the state of Maryland needs you to fill out something for the 1700th time, right? And it's like up and down, and not every day, like being an entrepreneur means not every day is going to be beautiful, and not every day is going to make you feel like, wow, I'm fabulous and I'm doing the most wonderful thing in the planet. I mean, a lot of it's just like grunt work. A lot of it really is grunt work. It's hard. It's unpleasant. It takes a lot of time. Some of it's not interesting. And then you have these fabulous epiphanies, so it's really sort of, it's being able to be a risk taker. It's being humble. It's having a level of intellectual humility, which I feel like is so lacking in the United States right now on so many levels. Not to go off on politics, but I mean, there's like a level of sort of hostility in the world today, and it's sort of being mindful of yourself, centering yourself, realizing what you are capable and not capable of doing, and then how do you provide your best self to the rest of the world and to the problems that you're trying to solve.
Great. So I want to dive into the issue that we brought up earlier, just gender, right? So first question, which I don't think can be taken as a given, is do you identify as a woman in a startup or a woman in a clean tech startup? Is that something that you can identify with versus all other labels that can be applied to you? And how do you feel about this topic in general?
I identify with it.
I never used to. I always was just the person that would like bulldoze through. I was always like, it doesn't matter that I'm female or male. I just have to get this done. And I don't, until it really, for me, took having children to realize that there are only 24 hours in the day. And when you're with your children, you're not at work. And when you're at work, you're not with your children. And of course, men have children too. But I think the gender stereotypes are very intense, especially when you get married and when you have children or different things in your life. Everybody makes different decisions right now, but I just bulldozed through things. I would get barriers because I'm a petite female and people would give me a hard time. And then I would just think, well, shoot, I'm just going to ram through that too, and that I think has done me a disservice in my life more than a service. It's both ways, right? So, I mean, I think I am not a nuanced person. Like what you see is what you get. I'm honest to a fault. And that sometimes serves me very well, but it doesn't serve me very well. I'm not nuanced like it sounds like Mouchka is. And being aware of that is important. But I much more identify with being female because you realize that every single minute of every day is a compromise. We're all in this room together right now, and therefore we're not with our kids. We're not doing our other work. We're not doing anything else. It seems pretty obvious, but it's much more of an intense understanding when you have kids.
For me, I think being a woman is something that's personal in the sense that, as I said a little bit earlier, in the community where I grew up, women are not expected to have a career or to have a job beyond just getting a simple paycheck, and we are really expected to make family and children come first. So this is a very old battle for me, and it's very present on the top of my mind at all times. But professionally, I actually really associate myself more as a high performer and with high performers. That's my professional identity, is that I go and I get results, and I will get you results, whatever the situation is, whatever the obstacles are, whatever the fuck happens, I will get you those results. That's who I am professionally. So this is a situation where who we are and, our personal lives build, identities that always remain in the back of our minds. But then what we decide to do with it, of course, is up to us. And I do identify as a feminist. So that adds a nuance to all of this, where I do think that to promote gender parity in the workplace, it's not the right decision. It's the only decision. It's not about doing the good thing. It's economically sound. And so that's kind of how I think about that issue. But, I learned in grad school that the way that you shape your identity evolves with what part of your identity feels threatened. And definitely, in many professional situations, being a woman does pose challenges. And it just would not be true to say that it doesn't. So in those moments, it comes back forefront. But when I think about who I want to be and what I want to be, I just want to be a top performer, and I just want to be recognized for that.
It's so true that it's more forefront if that part of your identity is being threatened. I think the reason I was so quick to say, yep, identify with it, is because I'm one of two women in the 9-person company, and my job most days is to manage partnerships with utilities, mostly male, and contractors. entirely male. And I'm the only woman in the room, often the only younger person and or young woman in the room, pretty much all the time, except for at our office where I'm just one of the few women, not one of the few young people. And yeah, and I didn't realize how much sexism was so alive until I worked with home performance contractors. Hope none of them are listening. Or actually, I hope they are.
Thank you. Thank you. So one issue I want to bring up, and somewhat briefly, although that feels unfair because we could go on for a very long time about it, is this gender pay gap, right? I think we have started talking a little bit about being a female, and personally, female in a woman or in a energy startup has not been a title that I would have identified strongly with. At the same time, I'm starting to realize more and more that there are these broader issues that require and that we have a responsibility for addressing as women, but that organizations also have a responsibility to address. And so I think it's something that's more important to recognize and talk about. So when it comes to the gender pay gap, have you all witnessed this? And have you seen instances, for example, where women are paid less or women and men handle pay negotiations differently, for example, or other things along those lines?
Not my current position, but in one of my earlier positions, a good friend of mine at my job had the same exact job as her male counterpart, and she found out, actually through him, they were friends, that he was making a third more than she was. So she went back and brought it up with management, and they actually back paid her to when he had started to the equivalent pay of what he was making. But if he hadn't advocated for her just by being honest with her about how much he was making, that never even would have happened. And I want to make sure to point out that what I've experienced with sexism, mostly subversive, in my current and past positions, I've always actually been able to find a male ally to help advocate and make sure that wrong was righted. And I lean on my male colleagues really heavily at work when I'm dealing with gender-related challenges to negotiate those situations in our business's favor.
So let me redirect the question slightly, which is, what responsibility do you think that organizations have to address this? And Mouchka, maybe you can talk a bit about the actions that the Prime Minister of Canada has taken, and I will be excited to share what SparkFund is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, Prime Minister Trudeau has received multiple awards for specifically making a very firm, very targeted effort to reach parity in the cabinet. So not only does his cabinet is 50% female, but he has also really encouraged all agencies of government to kind of follow suit and to make sure that there is the appropriate representation. And that, by the way, doesn't just apply to females, really also applies to different races and ethnicities, etc. But it's inspiring to see what a prime minister who identifies himself as a feminist does. So one thing that Prime Minister Trudeau really insisted on, and one practice of the government of Canada, is transparency regarding salaries. So don't do it now, but any of you could actually go and Google my salary and find out exactly what I make and what each of my colleagues make. And it's not negotiable when you come in. The raises are also not negotiable. They happen at the same pace, based on the very same factors, to everybody, regardless of anything that is not related to results. And that's implemented very ferociously. So I think that transparency is really, 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 really important. We are in a culture where it's not really appropriate to talk about salaries or to tell people what you make or what you don't make. In a way, that's a little bit of a shame because it becomes difficult for anyone who has difficulty understanding what they are worth and what they should ask for, to actually be able to go and advocate for what they think they should get. It's a very different situation when you know what your counterparts are making for doing the same job as you, for having a similar years of experience as you. So transparency is one thing. I think the second thing is to create paths that actually take advantage of the skills that women specifically can bring to the workforce. And that's the economic argument, right? Where you make sure that you really leverage the strengths of all your population and not just your selected population. And then the third thing is to create a culture where your employees and your colleagues feel like they can speak up and actually go and say what they think they deserve and actually go and say it when they need a raise or when they want a promotion. And so I think that as the leadership of a company, as a manager, that's a very important culture to promote as well.
Yeah, I'd just add, so I worked at a company called Next Step Living based in Boston, and we would perform energy audits on single-family homes, and then we would upsell additional products and services like what Allie's talked about, insulation, air sealing, community solar, HVAC units, things like that. And as you might expect, our company was less than 20% female. Most of the females were in the back office or, HR, legal, that sort of thing. I was the only, for parts of the time, I was the only senior leadership person who was female. And what I did to try to deal with is that I created a women at NSL group where we would meet over lunch once every other week sort of thing, or once every other month, depending on when we were having things happen, and we would try to solve problems collectively. So for an example, one of the saleswomen that would go in and she would try to sell windows was getting, she was harassed multiple times not by coworkers, but rather by people she was trying to sell products to. And so, it's really just sort of developing that network, and then all of us together trying to figure out how would you respond to that, and how should you respond to that, and what should we do in the future to try to make it better for women who are salespeople. The response is not just don't have any female salespeople trying to sell windows to homeowners, but rather how do we arm her so that she can adequately manage that in the future. I think it's not just within the company, but it's also to whomever you're selling. I think, different generations, different backgrounds, all sorts of things don't really understand how to deal with things, or are just a little bit backwards. So I would say that as one point. And then another point is it's sort of the negotiation skills. I think it's, and I did that in a lot of the women in NSL meetings as well, is sort of how do you negotiate on your own behalf? And this goes back to the not feeling confident in yourself enough as a woman, and men feeling overconfident, women feeling underconfident. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have already read Sheryl Sandberg's book, but one of the things that I really liked about Lean In was when she was told by her husband to negotiate more with Mark Zuckerberg when she was trying to get her job, because if you don't even try to negotiate on your own behalf, are you going to negotiate on behalf of Facebook in the future? And that really resonated with me, because if you don't stick up for yourself, nobody else is going to.
Great. So I want to get into our last theme, which is how do we get more women to take leadership roles in the world, but also specifically in kind of growing energy companies. And I have a few prompts on that. Claire, you wrote a really great article that was published in Green Tech Media about how exactly we do that, and you got into really tangible, specific suggestions. So I encourage everyone to read that, and maybe you can talk a little bit about those points in a second. One point I want to kind of explore, or prompt I want to give, is this idea of pushing women to take things on that they're not comfortable with, or maybe feel that they're not qualified to do. We talked about each of us individually doing that in the past. There's Reshma Sojani wrote a book, but also did a great TED Talk, founder of Girls Who Code, a great TED Talk about how we teach girls as a society and parents, we teach girls to be perfect, and we teach boys to be brave, and what that does to impact how girls take on new challenges and shy away from anything where they may fail, right? And as you can imagine, when you're shying away from something where you think you're going to fail, you aim a little bit lower. So I want to hear kind of thoughts about how you think that impacts women in leadership, and how, if we encourage women and girls at a young age, right, to take bigger jumps and embrace failure, do you think that gets at one of the failure points as to why we have so few women in the leadership space? Any who are? Yeah. Open
Okay.
to any of you.
I mean, yes, I think we train children at a very young age. We need to train women and men at a very young age. I've read a lot about this. My son's in first grade, and by first and second grade, girls are already taught subconsciously, probably not overtly, that they're not going to be as good at math as boys are. That's got to change, right? That's very obvious at the beginning. And you as a parent have to tell your daughters that they're just as capable and just as strong and just as brave, and just as capable and just as perfect as their brothers, right? So, I mean, that's part of it. But I think part of it, I don't think it's really just trying to teach women to be more brave. I think it's giving them the skills and giving them the tool sets. So it's having the mentorship groups. I live in Maryland. It's not a hotbed of clean tech activity, but we created a group called the Maryland Women in Energy Happy Hour, and we meet once a month. So just like there's boys clubs where they go play golf and do whatever they do, like we meet and drink once a month, and that actually helps us all, right? Like, because it's like, oh, did you know you need to talk to this person about getting this job so you can do this thing, right? And I think it's like networking. Women often are good networkers. I love networking. I'm good at it. Sounds like everybody here is good at it. That's great. So use it to your advantage, right? And then it's also sort of developing the tools that women, quote unquote, don't necessarily have. Like everywhere I go, I tell people, take an excellent finance course and learn how to write spreadsheets inside and out and backwards and forwards. Like women have to be twice as good at that stuff because we just do. It shouldn't have to be that way, but everyone in the entrepreneurial space should take an online class, or and especially females, to be able to write a cash flow, income statement, and balance sheet. You just have to be able to do it, because otherwise people are going to run circles around you. There's a lot of, it's not fair. It shouldn't be that we have to be better to get to the same place, but unfortunately that is what it is. And I think the only way that changes is by having enough women, having a critical mass of women, being there in the room, supporting other women, and having skills that get us to the next level.
I certainly feel responsible in a leadership role at an organization we're hiring, so we have more people coming aboard, to give people, women included, and not just the people who are sort of most braggadocious about their skill sets or most boisterous and overconfident, but women and everybody, right? Giving them opportunities and pushing them a little bit to take on things that they may not be ready or feel ready to do, and making sure that is not who then escalates in their career is not self-selected by who feels the most overconfident, but also who is potentially most capable and willing to step up to the challenge. So I know we have maybe 15, 20 minutes left for questions. So I want to open up the question world for these panelists. And I have a few backups in case I have no eager takers.
Come on.
So maybe a question I can posit to start is that I think that the energy startup space can actually serve as a really great incubator or sandbox for encouraging women leaders. And one reason I would say that is because it's a space, as many of you identified from the beginning, where nobody knows what they're doing because things are changing so quickly, right? Any area where there's a lot of change and a lot of disruption, people can be fast experts more than in other sectors. Is that something you guys would agree with?
I definitely agree. Like, I think that, and we were actually speaking on a panel a few months ago, I said the same thing. I think that the energy industry needs fresh blood, real bad. Old problems need people coming from other industries with other sets of experience, thinking outside the box. There'll be plenty of people around you if you decide to work in the energy industry who have background in the energy industry. But I think that because it's such an entrenched industry, not a lot of people think outside of the way things have always been done. And frankly, that's why we haven't seen that much innovation in the industry. So I think there's a huge opportunity for people with different skill sets and different sets of experience to come into this industry and shake it up. That's what we do now. Shake things up. People know experience.
I would just add to that I think that startups in general, they are the sandbox of all industries, right? And I think that the reason for that is that those startups, those ventures, they fail all the time. And that anybody who is a veteran of the startup world will tell you that they failed 200 times for one big win, and that they learned more from all of their failures than they did from that win. And so you have that freedom. You have the freedom to experiment. You have the freedom to fail. You have the freedom to be flexible. You have the freedom to implement different results. You have a smaller team, so you have the freedom to speak up. And so all of these liberations, I think they matter tremendously, because the more free we are, the more free our mind can be, and the more we open ourselves up to innovation.
Taught me how to run my business. And I'm wondering today what kind of sexism you face and how you react to it. Do you tell that person off? You just kind of like keep it moving, keep it going on? And then to the panel, what has been one of the most important lessons you've learned over the span of your career or in the industry?
Good questions. And your name? And where are you from?
My name is Nunu. I'm from Johannesburg, South Africa.
And I'm sorry, what do you do?
Oh, I'm a student here at CGA. I'm in the Energy and Environmental Policy concentration.
Excellent. I don't face as much sexism as I used to. I think perhaps that's just because I'm older and I've been in the industry for long enough that I've sort of made a mark. I don't know for sure, but I also don't let it get to me as much. I'm more than happy to put my foot down and say, you know what, that was totally inappropriate. I'm going to just tell you that's inappropriate and let's move on. So I think I'm also more confident in not letting things like that ruffle me as much. Not saying that it's acceptable by any means, but I think it's better than it was in the late 90s. I'm older and I'm less willing to tolerate it. So yeah, we'll take it from there. And then that second question for the rest of the panel.
I don't know if that's going to be a little bit of a disappointment, but the best advice, the best lesson I ever got was from my grandfather, who knows nothing about clean technology. I think if you would tell him there is something called clean technology, he would be very happy that I'm finally cleaning my house. But my grandfather, he didn't go to high school or anything, but when he learned that I was going to go to college, he tried to ask me what I was interested in. I tried to explain to him. It didn't work out very well. And so in the end, he told me, listen, it really doesn't matter, actually, what you want to do or who you want to be. The only thing that really matters is that you're the very best at it. And if you want to be a janitor and you're the best janitor, then you're going to be successful and you're going to get power and riches and happiness. So just choose what it is that you have the best shot at being the best and do it. Like, go all the way at it and do that. Become the best, become excellent. And so that has become my motto. It's what I live by.
That's so interesting. My biggest lesson is the exact opposite. Because I spent my whole life trying to be the best at everything. And I've been obsessed with being the best. And it has driven me insane. And the biggest lesson I've had is just to try to be really good enough. And to think that good enough is good enough. And truthfully, like, if you're someone who's obsessed with being the best, usually your good enough is way better than most people's good enough. So mine has been the exact opposite.
Yeah, but not everything. Your thing. You need to find your thing that, responds to your own balance.
I don't think anyone is. I don't know. I don't think that everyone has to choose one thing. I think that puts too much pressure on a lot of people. It's definitely too much pressure for me. I don't think I'd be able to stay motivated professionally if I felt like I had to pick that one thing.
And maybe there's a difference between the subjective and objective best too, right? So you can be the best at something with maybe objectively there's always going to be somebody who's better than you at any one thing. But if you're giving your best to it and doing kind of the best that you possibly can, maybe that speaks to your lesson.
Yeah, you could definitely interpret it that way, to be the best you
I'm
can
putting
be.
words in
We
your
don't have to
grandfather's
agree.
mouth.
It's more interesting if we don't.
We also can't disagree, but I also do think, Ali, that you're being harsh on yourself.
What's the best advice you've gotten, Angela?
I don't know if it's advice. But I think, and I spoke to this earlier, the thing that keeps coming back at me, or it almost feels like every lesson that I step back and say, oh, I've learned this. This is new, stems from the same thing, which is small actions or small something compounding, right? So whether it's one little thing per day or just what feels like incremental molasses-paced progress is actually, when applied consistently, it has massive, immense returns. And I find that in everything, right? Whether it's work, your personal life, learning a new skill, kind of anything.
And one of the best pieces of advice I got was to try to find the joy in every day, because I, like Allie, I'm a planner and I'm an executor and I have to get stuff done as fast as I can. And a lot of it's just, today was fabulous because my 2-year-old figured out how to jump on one foot, or whatever it is. I mean, or because I finally had a conversation with somebody I wanted to have a conversation with for 10 months, at finding the joy in every day. I mean, there's little nuggets of wisdom in everything you learn, and just sort of being receptive to change, and again, having the humility to enjoy the day.
Thank you. My name is Delane. I'm also a student here at NYU studying at Sasan, studying international development, gender, and peace building. And my question is, what aspects, if any, of your work incorporate broader pro-renewables lobbying, and what strengths or challenges women face by taking on that kind of advocacy for this field? Thank you.
Any takers to start?
You can. I can go next.
No. The short answer is no. In my experience and my work, have not done any sort of lobbying. I think it when you work in a field where so many people feel tied to this bigger mission, it's inevitable that some of the folks do feel or do work on, whether it's lobbying formally or just advocating for some of those policies. I think it does end up happening in an emotionally charged environment that makes things challenging. I don't know if I have any specific thoughts on the female aspect of that, though, or any real tangible experience.
Yeah, I mean, I've with property assessed clean energy, you have to get an ordinance passed municipality by municipality. So I've worked across the state of Maryland to get municipalities passed in Baltimore City and Baltimore County and things like that. It hasn't really been impacted at all by the fact that I'm female, to be honest. I mean, it depends on where you are, what you're lobbying for, et cetera, et cetera. But I actually find there's lots of female lobbyists and lots of female government affairs people. So I would argue that like, of all of the different things one could do in the sort of environment, energy field, lobbying and government affairs is something that's more heavily female than anything else.
Yeah. From my brief experience with advocacy and lobbying, and then also I used to work for an organization that did a lot of policy work, I would say, from what I observed, the barriers I see that a lot of people have that try to get involved in policy advocacy and policy lobbying and lobbying on behalf of certain solutions is more not having a good, not being well versed in how to talk about things in the terms that mean something to the people they're lobbying. And I found when I was doing a lot of lobbying around renewables, there were a lot of people like to talk about it in the context of the problems renewables are trying to solve and the softer sort of motivations for why you want that, when the people who their opponents are speaking in terms of business and economics, and the barriers I saw had more to do with not speaking the same language and not being able to speak in the terms of business, which is ultimately the powerful argument.
Yeah, I've had similar experiences. I mean, we obviously don't lobby anyone or anything, but I have worked with some lobbyists or met lobbyists or worked with some of my clients who have had to use lobbying strategies in order to get to what they wanted. I haven't found as big a gap in that specific subsector personally. I'm not sure why. I feel like it, in a way, it is understood sometimes as a communications role, and that is understood sometimes as a woman skill, if that makes sense. So I think in a way maybe that there is some facility in that sense. What's interesting though is that when you get to bigger lobbies that champion some more specific, more delicate individual interests, then you start seeing more males because then those lobbies tend to be a little bit more aggressive. They tend to be more forceful, more persistent, more resilient, and sometimes you have to resort to things other than sending email and phone calls and inviting people to dinner without getting into too many details. So overall, I would say that I think it's an interesting area for women to work, if one was so inclined as to utilize their communication skills. But I have personally not really witnessed as big a gap as in some other subsectors.
Go ahead.
Thank you all for being here. So I'd like just to ask you to share some advice for someone entering the industry right now. My name is Juliana. I've recently graduated from the program in Energy Policy and Environment. And I used to be a financial journalist before, and I'm writing for the New York Energy Week, and sometimes I feel that my previous experience as a journalist is sometimes more important than the master's here. So since you all have a leadership position and hire people, what do you look at when you are looking at someone's resume? And I don't know, what advice do you have?
First, before I forget, if you know anyone who wants an internship, we need interns, and I promised everyone at the office that I would say that. So before I forget, for our company, because we're only 9 people and we just need help, and we need really competent people who don't need a lot of hand-holding, we look for people who have a demonstrated track record of getting things done, both independently and part of a team. And we don't necessarily care if you have experience in the energy industry or even in finance, depending on the role we're hiring for. Obviously, we look for people who have a demonstrated track record of getting things done and doing the kinds of things that they're going to need to do in the role going forward. So we just hired a salesperson. He had no experience selling what we sell, but he had demonstrated track record in sales, and that's what we were looking for. We've hired a lot of people who had no demonstrated track record, who just had a degree, either a master's or an undergraduate degree, who had shown that they're capable of getting things done in other contexts, and we look for people who can tell that story really well and bring passion and enthusiasm and a clear, just get it done attitude to their work. And in startups, that's really, I think, the most important thing.
Your point about how your experience as a journalist seems to matter more than your master's really took me back to when I was graduating from my master's, and I also did, I got my master's in IR. I think that when you have an MBA, when you have an MPA, employers understand very well what your master's taught you. And then if your master's is slightly different, you tend to potentially have to explain it. That was a big challenge that my entire class had. It was very frustrating. I mean, I had one of my classmates who had been an executive assistant to some very big organization before she came to grad school. And everybody tried to hire her into administration. And she was just like, I am not an administrator. And she made jokes about like making a poster and walking everywhere with it. It was very, very frustrating for her. What I would advise you to do is to think about the actual skills that you have gained during your master's, the transferable skills that you have gained during your master's, and to really, really highlight those. It's okay to put them in conjunction with your experience as a journalist. It's even good because for employers, that's where you have a track record in the workplace. That's what they understand. That's what they can count on. But if you can tie your degree to that, even if it's not exactly, what your class was about, I think that would help you potentially a lot. And don't hesitate to talk about internships, etc. Even though they're not full-time experience and they don't completely count as full-time experience, it's still one more way, to weave that narrative and to weave that story about, your own journey and what you are going to bring to people. That's all that employers really want to know. They want to know what you're going to bring to their team. They need to be able to picture you in their team. So give them that picture. You don't need to prove that you're excellent. You don't need to prove that, you know everything, that this is perfect, that you're the one fit. You just need to give them a very clear picture of like, when I join your team, this is what I'm going to bring to the table. This is how I'm going to help. This is how I'm going to contribute. That's one point that Ali touched upon when she said that what they were looking for, people get things done. Right? And so anybody who sold that to them, who sold that I can get things done, they could imagine in their offices going out and actually getting things done. So that's really what you want to understand about the companies you're applying for. What is that one trait of personality? That was that one core thing that they're really looking to recruit for and to hire. And focus on that and you'll be perfectly fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think showing a level of intellectual curiosity is really important. I think showing your passion. And then I'm shocked at, I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people. I'm always shocked at when people don't do any research on the position that they're applying for. It's so irritating because it's just a waste of everybody's time. And we're hiring people to save time. So it's really like, why the hell are you here? Like, why is this an interesting position for you, right? Like, and how are you going to add value to my company, right? And that is really the basic, right? And it's showing the intellectual curiosity. It's showing you that what you're passionate about. I don't care as much, frankly, about of course I do, but about your track record. I care about what are you going to bring now, right? And really expressing that in a way that makes me feel like you are a good human being. You're going to add value to my company. You're somebody that I want to spend time with every day.
I'd also add, especially something I come across a lot in this field, because we're working on problems that address certain issues that people feel very passionately about, like environmental issues and climate change and things like that. People tend to I've noticed that job seekers tend to really focus on that when they're coming to us looking for opportunities or just coming to me for job seeking advice. And frankly, my number one piece of advice is don't make that the center of your story or why you're interested in working for my company. If someone tells me that that's why they're interested in working for my company, I actually am not as interested in them, even though I feel the same way and that's my motivation too. Like, there's a lot of people who say that and who care about that. And it just, one of our co-founders, I think could care less about climate change and we don't agree on anything politically, but she believes in our business and what our idea and what we're trying to accomplish, and she has these competencies. I just think you need more than just a passion for the issues. And if you are passionate about the issues, and especially if you're not super familiar with the industry, get an understanding of the lay of the land, of these are the different subsegments of this industry. There's the policy, there's the sustainability crowd, there's the clean tech crowd. Within clean tech, there's the hard tech companies, and then there's the finance companies, and then there's the services companies. And you need to understand the nuance of all of those different subsegments of the industry. And you need to understand the differences between solar and wind and energy storage and energy efficiency. And if someone comes to me asking me for career advice and they can't answer my questions about what specifically within this industry they're interested in, I tell them to go back and read 100 articles that I've compiled that they should read, and then come back to me and tell me what they're interested in. Because I can't help them unless they can be more specific than I'm interested in the environment.
I absolutely agree. And I will add one example to illustrate that, which is that last week we just made a recruiting decision where we interviewed a bunch of people for a role in energy. And we eventually had to choose between a few candidates, including one who had a lot of experience specifically dealing with environmental issues. And the entire conversation, she just talked about her passion for it and how important it was to her, and the environment, we need to save the planet, and this is terrible, and this is this and this is that. She made multiple political comments, which is a big no-no when you apply to work at the government. She made a lot of side comments about her benefits and stuff like that, which is a big no-no in any situation and applying for anything with anyone. But that's how much she believed in her own expertise in the specific issue and her own knowledge. And then we had another candidate who was a lot younger, had less experience, and told us from the get-go that he had little experience and knowledge of energy. But he really understood what we tried to do as trade commissioners at the Trade Commission. He really understood how we tried to serve Canadian companies, how we tried to get out of it. He had really done his research on past successes that we had had, on some programs that we had had, and that was so much more valuable than spending an hour listening about why what we work on is important. We are already convinced, or if we are not, you're not going to convince us in an hour. So it kind of really like brings us back to that whole idea of, let us see how you will work in the team, how you will integrate the team, how much you will bring, so that we can't wait to take you on.
Thank you. And I have one plug that Spark Fund is also hiring, so please check out our careers website. I would give you the URL, but I don't know the exact one. So thank you again for joining us, everyone. I've found this encouraging, and I hope it can be encouraging for all of us to kind of find the areas, the things you're really good at, recognize the things you're not, relentlessly pursue learning in those areas, push yourself to the point of failure, and take on things that you may not be ready for. As I mentioned, the full video recording will be available on the website in a few days. You can subscribe to the podcast via iTunes, Stitcher, which I've never heard of, SoundCloud, and several other platforms. There are a number of great events being hosted here in the coming weeks. One is Energy Insecurity on the 23rd, and the Future of Nuclear Energy on March 29th. So we hope to see you again, and please join me in thanking our speakers one last time.